we all talk about and think about and see the photos and maybe have a chat to each other about those people out there who are pretty famous and living their life, and we judge this and we judge that, and we comment on this and we comment on that. And yet life is always, for everybody, it doesn't matter how famous you are, something that needs to be worked out step by step, difficulty by difficulty, and with those who are going to be able to walk best with you. That's what I love about our guests today. They've both been quite high profile in the Christian music scene, Rebecca St. James and Cubbie Fink. And they're talking about their marriage in this new book, Lasting Ever, and the ups and the downs, how they need to rely on God in what that is. But they're open about it. So really looking forward to sharing this conversation with Rebecca and Cubbie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
It's wonderful to have a chat to you about this. And I know, the story of especially your heart, Rebecca, around marriage and the focus on family has perhaps been told a little more than maybe Cubbie's story has been. Can we maybe start with you, Rebecca, around that? Many, many years ago, as you were sharing your music worldwide, there was conversations and songs around Wait For Me. There was books around that as well. It was all very much saying, hey, look, I want to be very public and open about the fact that I'm going to be saving myself for my husband, not just from a sexual way, but also in my heart and what I am, and I want to prepare well for that. My first question I want to say that was that something that you would go, I so love doing that? There are actually things, as I look back, I might have held a bit more back. What was your take as you reflect on that before we start looking forward?
Yeah, I love that question. I don't think I would have changed anything about what I said publicly, because it was such a natural thing. It wasn't anything that I felt forced to do. I'd committed to purity before, probably starting in music at 16. That was a value of mine already. And then in the US at that time, there was this, True Love Waits movement that was happening in the church very organically, and, hundreds of thousands, millions of young people pledging to wait. So it was almost like I was caught up in a movement that was just beyond me and beyond kind of my own convictions, but I was encouraged by it. It was a very positive thing for me. So to speak about it felt really organic, and then I wrote a song about it, and it touched a nerve. My song "Wait For Me" to my future husband that I didn't know yet, and then had these books about it, like probably 3 or 4 different books. So it became a thing. I think so I don't have regrets. I think where it just became challenging was to publicly, continue to share that, I'm singing this song, and what if there's no man out there? What if there is no husband? That was the challenging part. And I think it got lonelier, and I had struggles with my voice too, I think from just anxiety singing that song and being on stage, and that hope deferred that makes the heart sick kind of component. So now, after meeting my prince and getting married 14 years ago, to look at our kids and to see that God, made all those dreams come true, like it's just incredible. Like I don't think I'll ever take it for granted that I'm married and have kids. Yeah. It's just amazing. So I think there's a thankfulness and a gratitude that I'm experiencing because the wait was long, that I'm appreciative of that for sure.
Well, and I think as we, certainly during that time, many were so encouraged by that stance. But I the reason I asked that question was that there does feel like there would have had to be a wait, and I think you've discussed that there too. Cubbie, Rebecca sort of referenced that then as well, this idea of, that song. Did you hear the song at the time? Do you remember hearing that song, and what was your reflections?
The interesting thing is that I had not heard the song or really any of Rebecca's music, which I absolutely should have. I grew up in a Christian home and grew up listening and loving Christian music, and we actually had Rebecca's CDs in my house. My dad had a couple of her CDs, and I have memories of flipping through his collection and pulling out her CD and thinking that she was a pretty girl on the cover, but for whatever reason, never took the CD out of the case and put it in the player. And from where I sit today, I really look back and see that as divine protection, because I think it would have probably changed my perception of her, and it really kind of protected our first encounter and getting to know each other, it truly was just boy meets girl. I didn't have her up on a pedestal and didn't have, dreams or aspirations of, longing for this girl or meeting this girl. So
before we actually met.
So it still kind of boggles my mind that I was not familiar with her music. And, so no, I hadn't heard that song. And another kind of beautiful aspect of that is that there truly was a organic moment that happened the first time we met that she spoke or that she speaks to or sings to in that song. And she talks about waiting for the look in your eye when we meet for the first time. And when we met for the first time, we really had a magical moment of locking eyes from across the room the first time we saw each other. And it was, kind of one of those movie moments where time seemed to slow down and the music faded. And there was just so much in that first glance. And we ended up making our way across the room and chatting for the rest of the evening, and the rest is kind of history. But yeah, just the beauty of God's kind of protection of that initial moment and just sort of the initial stages of our relationship is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I love that. I just want to stay with this bit just for a moment more, and then we're going to talk a bit more about the book and what you're sharing there. Cubbie, I want to ask that too. We sort of talked with Rebecca there about this idea of, there is a weight of publicly sharing something about your life, and especially about your hope in something in the future and a decision you're going to make or not make, as the case may be, about that purity concept before marriage. Once you did start saying, okay, well, something's going on here now with Rebecca, and we're getting serious, and you heard more of that story, was there any pressure or weight that you went, well, what do I have to actually work through with Rebecca being so public about this previously? Was there anything you had to work through in that regards?
No, honestly, it was a breath of fresh air, because it was a commitment that I had made myself very early on in my walk with the Lord, that it was something that was important to me to save until marriage. And living in LA at the time, you met very few people, if any, that shared that value. And I married much later in life than I had anticipated. I always thought I was going to marry relatively young, probably early 20s, and I was approaching 30, so late 20s by the time we met. So having, waited for as long as I did, and then to meet her and realize that she had a similar, same commitment and very similar values and approach to faith and all the things, it was just... It was incredibly encouraging to finally find someone that not only was I attracted to, but also held strong, for years through a very countercultural decision. There was probably many opportunities for both of us to just throw in the towel and say, this is too hard. I'm sick of the wait, and give in to the desires of the flesh, but to meet her and realize that she had held strong, and the fact that she was public about it, was also encouraging. I mean, the fact that she had the courage to take a stance on it, not only for herself, but also encourage, hundreds of thousands of young people along in her journey was amazing.
Both of you come to life generally, and even one of the bylines on this book is about faith, music, family, and being found by true love. This music element of your worlds are both very, very strong, and yet the thing I'm most fascinated, or perhaps not most fascinated, but I'm quite impressed with both of you, is that for both of you in different ways, Rebecca, for a time you said, look, I'm not going to focus on music. I have so many opportunities, but I want to really zone in on family. I want to zone in on marriage. This is the aspect of it. I know for you, Cubbie, too, there was different ways that you left parts of music to explore other areas. But how do you now look at the idea of music, this gifting that you have, the hard work that you've put in, and how does music fit into both your worlds now as you focus very much about Jesus first, family second, but music is a part of your life? How does it fit in now?
What a good question. Yeah, I mean, it is amazing that both of us have done music, and traveled the world. And like, even when I was traveling with foster people with Cub after we were married, I he was playing some of the same venues or arenas that I had played years before that I was like recognizing, that were familiar to me. So just having that in common and being able to be out in the front of house and watch him and be proud of him and understand that world and not glamorize it, like, was just such a blessing. Like, I'm just so thankful that we had that in common and that I could support him and he could support me in that way. And then we've partnered, in music, like, since getting married too. Like, he executive produced my last album, Kingdom Come, and, we spoke into every part of that. And we're about to put out a version of my song, You Make Everything Beautiful, that was in Unsung Hero, the movie, last year. And it's a new version. So I released that 14 years ago, right about the time actually that we got married. Like, I think it was same month or like just within that same, time frame. And now we're releasing it with our kids on it. Actually, two of our girls are singing on it. We haven't even publicly shared that until this moment. But so it's just wild now, kind of doing this as a family and kind of the sweetness of, navigating a little bit of music here and there as a family, and, the family coming out on the road, and like we've done a bit of overseas travel as well. And so the kids are able to see, mommy do shows and festivals and a little bit of touring, and just, it's nice inviting them into this part of my life, because it's like, I lived it with my family of origin, but, like longing for this season of my life. Like, for decades, I was on the road longing for the season I'm in right now. And so then for my little family now to come on the road with me and, do some of these shows and events, it just feels really full circle and really sweet. So I would say we're dabbling in a little bit of music here and there. No big old, albums planned or anything like that, but, a few singles that we're planning to release here and there. And there's kind of a sweetness on the relaxed vibe about it now, I think, where it doesn't come from this place of, I've got to push it through. It's like it's been two years or so and we've got to put another album out. It's more just coming from that very place of like writing about things that are relevant to me in this time in my life, and then being nudged by the Holy Spirit really to put certain songs out. So I think it's a freer place, I would say, than I've felt in the past. Maybe it's just much more hands open, which is really nice.
Yeah, I love that.
I was just going to say, it's been really incredible to experience music through the eyes and ears of our children, and it was in kind of a unique, beautiful way. It was through our first daughter, Gemma, that God kind of reopened my heart to music, because after leaving the band, both Rebecca and I entered a season that we refer to in the book as our winter season. It was incredibly challenging, and it was a season that I just actually stopped listening to music, and it was, our house was not filled with music in that season. And I remember our daughter, who was probably around the time she was 2, kind of toddling around the house, and I remember, I think the TV was on and this song came on, and her eyes lit up and she just focused on the TV, and it was just a visceral reaction to this music that was just so entrancing almost. And she's just had such a beautiful love for music from a very early age. And then now our daughter Imogen has a very similar love for music, and now our son River is just, he's a human beatbox. He
quite the drama.
He beatboxes a soundtrack to his life, and the girls are walking around the house harmonizing with each other while River's, dropping a beat behind it. So it's seeing music be such a beautiful uniting factor for them, and just such a beautiful expression of their joy. And it's been amazing to kind of re-engage in the beauty of music through them and their
freedom with it, really.
Yeah.
Cubbie, I wanted to ask you too. I've had the privilege of interviewing Rebecca in the past, and certainly I know I still talk about the interview we did around the fact that her passion for family and her willingness to say, look, even if it comes to music and family, there's no question I'm putting family first. Like, I still reference that in conversations, and family things come up. And I chatted last year with Helen as well Rebecca's mum as Unsung Hero came out, and we talked about Rebecca's love of family. So, Rebecca, you talked about a lot in that regards, even though you're not Chad. Cubbie, I wanted to ask you that perspective. Like, Rebecca's love and willingness for family and focusing on that is so deep for her. Is that something that was very natural for you as you came into a married relationship, that digging into family was going to be a real core part of what that was? I know that in your life as you grew up, there was some more challenges around what it meant to live in life. Was this a natural part for you, or something you had to work out a bit harder?
It was very natural. I grew up with a really beautiful home life and family life, and it wasn't perfect, as no family is perfect, but I had parents that loved each other and loved myself and my sister very well, and always felt like home and family was a safe place, and it was something that I always had a deep desire to foster as well, and to have a wife and children under one roof was a dream of mine. And it was actually a prerequisite in order for her father to say yes. The talk that I had with Rebecca's dad before I proposed, he basically said, Rebecca's going to want to have children, and probably going to want to have a lot of them, and probably going to want to have them pretty quickly. And if you're not okay with that, then I'm not okay with you marrying my daughter. And I was able to honestly tell him I'm absolutely okay with that, and to be honest, very excited about it. So yeah, the family is incredibly important to me, and it's something that in our marriage, we, went through a season where we weren't doing a lot publicly, and when God called us kind of back into more public ministry, we very diligently we made the decision that family would not take a back seat to what God was calling us to. We always put family first, put our marriage first, put our children first, and then ministry would follow that. And we've done everything we can to make our family and our children a part of what we do. And when Rebecca has shows, or when I'm working on films, or whatever we might have going on, we do everything we can to do it together, do it as a family. We don't have other people raise our children. We keep our family, together. And, it offers a fair bit of challenges, and traveling with 3 kids on early flights around the world is not the easiest, but it's 100% worth it.
And really beautiful to get to.
Rebecca, how important do you think it is for marriages to have that sort of conversation like that Cubbie was just talking about? I know that there are some marriages that are, a decade in, and I know personally a bit more troubled because they didn't have that conversation even around how many kids do we want? Like how important do you think it is, as someone maybe is heading towards a marriage at the moment, to have those sorts of bigger picture conversations that feel like you're getting a little ahead of the game, but to actually have some of those conversations early?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's very important, and I love that you're bringing that up. I think it's a very valuable topic of conversation. We did premarital counseling with one of the pastors that married us, actually, and his wife, and I think that was really important because I think they were a catalyst for talking about some of these things that you may not think to talk about necessarily on the front end. What are your expectations when it comes to having kids, and what does that look like? And is it really a dream of yours, both of you? So I think it is important. And I similarly know people that one of the spouses thought that they would have kids, and then the other one doesn't want to, and they kind of figure that out in marriage, and it's difficult. So I think it's wonderful to talk about just about anything that you can think of on the front end. What are your expectations? I think a lot of the pain of life in relationships comes from missed expectations. Well, I thought that they would treat me in this way, or I thought that they wanted this, and so I think, especially in marriage, such a precious, sacred relationship, that we talk through all the things that we can possibly think of and try to get in alignment with the expectations. I think that really helps. And I think it helps avoid some of the conflict, because there will be conflict in marriage. There is for any couple. But if you can kind of limit it by talking through the expectations on the front end, I think it can help a lot in that unity.
I know, we had that conversation, my wife and I, 3 kids is where it was. I was secretly hoping maybe we'd get a 4th in there. But we settled, 3 was where it settled. And in fact, actually, we also had, a moment where we stopped, and before we got married, we actually sat down. This was without our parents around, and actually said, what are all the awesome things about your parents that we love and the way their marriage works? And what are the things we think we don't like? And then let's do the same with my parents. And we actually had built a list of cool things we wanted to add and things we wanted to avoid of what we saw. But that was a really interesting perspective to go through. Now, we're the only 2 that have ever seen that list, but it was an interesting perspective of the things we know will influence us most are our own marriages that we have seen or our own families. And so that was a good space, at least for us to start.
Yeah, that's great. What great advice to people listening.
My guests today are Rebecca St. James, Cubbie Fink, are the authors of this book, Lasting Ever, Faith, Music, Family, and Being Found by True Love. We're going to talk more about the reasons behind this book, why put this out right now, and some more of the aspects of how do they involve this sort of real-life examples of, hey, I'm out and I'm doing family, with an intertwining of God's role in what it means to hold families together well. That's on the way in a couple of minutes' time here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
You're both experienced in family and marriage, but you're also, there's others who have got many more decades ahead of you. Was it a little nerve-wracking to say, well, we could actually put a book out that sort of says these things, as not necessarily saying we're the experts and all this stuff, but we want to share that. What was the purpose to say, look, let's actually put a book out right now as we are going through what we're going through at this time?
I think there's something that is very culturally inviting, in the day and age that we're living in, to be in process with things rather than being an expert. And I don't know that I've ever called myself an expert on anything. I think, obviously music, I've done a lot in that world, but I think when it comes to marriage and parenting, I don't really want to set myself up as any form of expert. I think there's something about being in process that people like and appreciate, of just going, hey, I'm in it and I'm learning. And no, I'm not trying to boo-hoo experts. I think there's an absolute place for that. And in fact, I have a podcast with Focus on the Family where my co-host is the expert and I get to pick his brain every episode, as well as actual guests that are experts in parenting too and have written books on it. So I 100% believe in that. But when it comes to me, in this book, I think we made it a very intentional thing to be very vulnerable, along with having great laughs and, all the fun stuff of our journeys, Cubbie's journey with foster people and my journey in music and all of the kind of behind the scenes fun of that. Also just going, some of this real and hard and challenging stuff has happened to us with miscarriages and job loss and Cubbie's mom dying and burnout pain on my end with music and all of it. So just wanting to be very real. And I think when you kind of read or, hear somebody read, now we also, read our book, we narrated our book ourselves. And I think when you hear somebody's story and it's kind of like sitting down with them and having a coffee and just going, wow, we really saw God's goodness and his faithfulness in all these areas of our lives. And we've seen him bring things full circle so often in our stories. I think our hearts were encouraged to discover all these full circle moments in a new way by diving into them through the book. But then also we hope and we pray, and we are seeing that many people are being encouraged through the stories too, because it's like we all have that human, need to know that we're not alone and that other people go through the same kind of things. So I think that was an intent of ours. What would you say, Cubbie? What do you think I put words about around that aptly?
I think you nailed it.
Oh, you so good.
I love that. Cubbie, could I bounce a bit off what Rebecca said there too, which is that I think the heart of any book, and as you've shared there, is to I love the phrasing, to be open, to be vulnerable, and you've certainly done that. And you mentioned some of those areas too, Rebecca. That what feedback have you had as people have been reading that or listening to you as you do that? Cubbie, has there been one or two stories that have come back, even if you can't use people's names specifically, but that you go, oh, this is what I really treasured, that this has had the impact because of the book for someone?
Yeah, there has been a fair bit of incredibly encouraging feedback. And I think probably some of the most personal or directly encouraging are people that have been ministered to by the stories that I chose to tell in regards to the trauma that I walked through as a young boy. And it was a journey, trying to figure out whether or not I was going to be that vulnerable and share those stories, because prior to this book being written, there was really only a handful of people in my life that were aware of that trauma. And it was something that I approached very prayerfully and ultimately felt like I needed to share. And with the intention of hope, hopefully encouraging other people to bring their stories to light and also have the courage to face the hard things. And there was a large part of my life where that trauma was neglected, that trauma was not addressed, and ultimately I became very aware of how that was having a very negative effect on me and hindering me as a husband and as a father, and reaching the point that I knew I needed help to deal with it, and walking through that journey of actually facing, the fear of that trauma, but ultimately experiencing the healing on the other side was revolutionary. And if I could play any small part in helping others have the courage to face the hard things in their life, it's absolutely worth it. So the feedback that I've had from people just thanking me for that vulnerability and being encouraged by it, and even resonating with it, because it's unfortunately a far too common issue. So many people have faced similar trauma, and a lot of it goes unspoken to. A lot of it remains in the dark. A lot of it remains hidden away. And unfortunately, when it is hidden, when it is in the dark, the enemy is victorious. But it's bringing those things into the light and offering them to the Lord, that the Lord is able to have the victory through healing. So that's definitely been the most encouraging feedback that I've received.
And I was so proud of Cubbie's strength and courage too in sharing it. Like, I think it's just amazing, and just grew my respect for him, that he's willing to offer his life really as a ministry to God, for God to use it to encourage other people to draw near to him in those really sensitive areas.
We have one of these incredible privileges doing a radio show like this as well, where there's a whole host of people who are listening, and we don't know necessarily who they are personally. But Cubbie, I'm just wondering if somebody is in some sort of similar situation where there's some sort of childhood trauma, whatever that trauma may have been, and perhaps they realise, a bit like yourself, I haven't really dealt with this. Here I am in my adulthood, and I've sort of tried to bury parts of it, but I need to do something. What's just the first step, do you think? What is the initial first thing to just start a journey? It's not just one thing that's going to fix that. There's going to be a whole lot of things, I'm sure. But what's your encouragement right now, wherever they may be, to say, look, I want to deal with whatever their thing is? What's the first step they should do?
I think it's admitting to yourself that it's okay to ask for help. I think, especially as men, there's a tendency to just grit your teeth and muscle through it and say, I can handle it, and I'm strong enough to just do this on my own. But being willing to admit, and I think, even in my gritting teeth, flexing muscle seasons, I think if I was really honest with myself, I I would admit that I wasn't strong enough to handle it on my own, but I think it's too easy to put on that front. So just the first step is just being willing to admit to yourself that it's okay to ask for help. And then I think the step that follows that is just finding the right person to help. And I found an incredible counselor that really helped gently walk me through that process. And it was hard, but well worth the journey.
And this person too was very sensitive to Jesus nudgings and leadings and really helped Cub like spiritually see Jesus carefully, looking after his heart in that area too. So I think, we would probably encourage a Christian counselor, somebody who can, not only navigate it just with wisdom as to, kind of getting to the bottom of it and the counseling part, but also can spiritually kind of encourage you to look to the true hope that we have in him. Because I know that was a huge component for Cubbie, and just being his wife, kind of watching him walk through it. It was the faith component that really helped him to actually get through it.
One thing we sort of acknowledge as well that, we know this show goes around Australia, around New Zealand. We understand that there's a whole host of people who are listening who may have that strong faith belief and a strong belief in Jesus, as you've been sort of referencing. And there's others that perhaps are okay to listen to this radio station and hear a bit about what it means about Jesus and God, but maybe not sort of quite in that perspective yet.
Yep.
I want to grab one of the things that you talked about in the book too, which was this sort of idea that says, look, as you head towards a marriage, and if you're in that space, you're not going to find contentment in a marriage. It's got to start with actually, I got to be all right with who I am before Jesus, before God, in what it is. I suppose speaking to both those people who are maybe about to commit to a marriage or whatever it is, how do we best go and find a deep commitment with a God who loves us when we're maybe on the outer edges of understanding that God?
I mean, I feel like, and Cub might have some other ideas to add into it, but I think, finding community of people that are on that, journey of wanting to experience God's love and love him back with their lives as well. I think that's really, really important. I think of mentors and friends that have really encouraged me in hard seasons in my life or encouraged me in times of transition, into marriage, or like encouraged me during engagement when I was like wrestling with some fear even. I'd found this man that I loved and I knew he was the one for me, but there was fear of like, how do you know that you know that you know? And so when you invite people into that sacred part of your life, moving into, big commitments, like especially like marriage, and you're kind of just saying, hey, I want to seek wise counsel in this time. That's just, to me, that's just wisdom, and it's just a good idea to invite others that are wise into it. So I know that was an important part for us, and premarital counseling was a big deal for us. But I definitely advocate for the community part of pursuing God and hearing from him. People that are just going to love you enough to speak the truth in love and really have your back too down the track when it's you might go through hard times. We had mentors that were with us in our winter season that spoke into our lives and encouraged us then too. And so it's kind of sowing into the future as well.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most prevalent lies of the enemy and really, of culture at large is that contentment comes from circumstances. And it's the thing that culture is trying to tell us is if we just had X, Y, or Z, then we'll be happy. If we just had the job, if we just had the money, if we just had the wife, then we'll be happy. And I think that's, very tied to the fleshly desires of the way we're wired. But one of my favorite verses in the Bible is when Paul in Philippians says that he's learned the way to be content in any circumstance, whether he has a little or whether he has a lot. He finds his contentment in just knowing who he is in God, and God is providing what he needs for that moment, and not looking for the thing outside of what he has in that moment to make him content. And I think it's very easy to say, if I just had the relationship, if I just had the marriage, then I'll be happy. The reality is, if you can't find contentment without the marriage, you're not going to find contentment in the marriage. If you can't find contentment without money, you're not going to find contentment with money. It's finding contentment irregardless of your circumstances. That's the key. And the way you are able to do that is truly what I believe is the only place to find that kind of contentment is in the contentment that only Christ can provide. So finding that contentment will only add to the contentment that you can find in every other circumstance. But really, it's finding contentment first in Him, not looking to other things to bring contentment.
Cubbie Fink, Rebecca St. James, we wish you all the best with this new book, Lasting Ever. Thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable with it. Thank you for spending a bit of time with us today as the name of our program. Hopefully it helps us all head towards a better understanding of some part of our world. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Clayton. We've enjoyed it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Clayton.